G'day, well, it's Scott Picken. I'm the CEO and founder of Wealth Migrate. I'm actually standing here outside this building, which is 60 Oak Hill Boulevard. And it's one of our better portfolios that we've put together. And it's really, really exciting because effectively it's 2 years since we actually helped 34 investors from 5 different continents around the world actually invest in this portfolio. It was put together by our partners, SG Properties, and effectively we called this Wealth Migrate 1. It was the first portfolio they were put together, and it was facilitated on the Wealth Migrate platform, not only for putting the entire investment from investors all around the world, but also, and more importantly, continuing to manage the property ongoing and working in partnership with SG Properties, and that's headed up by Paul. What's fascinating is we had a breakfast this morning with Paul, and I just wanted to share with you some of the results that have been achieved over the last 2 years. This property, this portfolio actually transferred over 2 years ago. Now, what's really interesting is in this specific building, I walked into this building 2 years ago with Paul and Dr. Dolf de Roos and Henny Besadenhout, amongst others. And this building was half empty. That building over there was half empty, or actually about 3/4 empty. And one of the things we love to do when we buy something is look for a value place, or somewhere where we can add value to the market, not just rely on the market. So it was actually owned by 6 different doctors. And what was really interesting is that those doctors didn't want to spend any money on marketing. So when we bought this portfolio, and there's 5 buildings in this vicinity here, and there's another 2 buildings which are part of this portfolio. It's a 7-building portfolio, $16 million, $6 million in equity, which we looked at. But by the time we actually took transfer of the building, to talk in American language, by the time it closed, we'd actually already filled up this building. And that's why Paul from SG Properties is so good, because he actually took one of the smaller tenants from that building, he put them on the upstairs section of this building, and we actually got Piedmont Hospitals, which is a listed company in that building over there. Now that just gives you an example of some of the stuff that's actually happening. Now you can see it's pretty hot here. It's the middle of summer in Augusta, so it's pretty sweaty and a little bit windy. And if you see cars coming in and out of the parking lot, that's a good thing. We're not sitting in some studio trying to make a professional video shot. What we're actually trying to do is stand in front of a working building, and cars and coming in and out of the parking lot is good because it means that these are functional operational units. So let's just look at some of the things that have happened. In this building behind us, one of the tenants, there was actually a radiographer. They wanted to extend on their space. We actually built an extra 1,000 square foot, which is about 100 square meters worth of extra space. We actually loaned them the money at an 8% return, and that got us an additional $25,000 per year in rent. Now, if you take the current cap rates, that's over $500,000 in value that was actually created. Now, I need to remind you, when we bought this portfolio, by working with Henny and Paul, they knew that the TI, the tenant installation, shouldn't have been $20. It should have actually been $140. It's a long story, but just by doing that alone, they actually took off $1 million on this portfolio, and every single cent was actually passed on to the investors. So just this little expansion here actually increased the value of this building by over $500,000. What's also interesting is that the licenses in this building stay with the building, not with the tenant. So should they leave, and remember there's over $500 million worth of medical major hospitals. There's 3 major hospitals in this area. If they were to leave, that's fine, because there's other people that want to come here because the license stays with the building. Let's look at some of the other stuff that's pretty interesting. If I look down in that direction, there's a whole lot of land, because this was part of a big development, and ultimately, during the boom days, they didn't finish. And this land, we've actually got first right of refusal on it. There's one other pocket just behind us here. And right now we've got first right of refusal, and Paul is actually working. Let's just say it's a name that you all know, but he's working on actually closing out a deal with that so that we can expand this and continue to build a critical mass in this area. What's also interesting is that they're very conservative with the numbers. Both Henny, Michiel, Paul, and Alan, his financial controller, very, very conservative with the numbers. So on their projections for 2016, they had $125,000 set aside because they had 2 tenants here that were coming up where their leases had come to term. And they were expecting time where the tenants wouldn't be in the building, and they were also expecting TI, which is tenant installation, and costs to be able to be put in. Well, what Paul did really, really interesting is that they actually got the tenants to stay on to sign new leases, either 5 or 10 years leases, and therefore got no expense. So it's a major budgeted item that we're actually doing a lot better on. That means that this year in 2016, we're going to have somewhere from $75,000 to over $100,000 extra in income for 2016. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more than 10% additional return on the already predicted income numbers. Now, the other thing that's really interesting is that cap rates. We bought this at an 8.3% cap rate. Cap rates have actually compressed in this area. Sorry, they're now sitting at about 6.5%. Let's be conservative and say 7%. At a 7% cap rate, you're looking at this portfolio now being worth $18 million. You take the $500,000 we've added on, that's $18.5 million. Now, considering we bought it for $16 million, that means that it's $2.5 million worth of value that has been created. Considering that we put in $6 million in equity, we got a 65% loan to value, that's over 42% return on capital growth in US dollars. Forget about any currency devaluation in any currency. 42% in US dollars. But what's also interesting is that the investors have got over a 10% cash on cash return for the last 2 years. And that's not taking into account the 42%. I think also what's really interesting here is that this block was owned by a bunch of doctors. They weren't very good with their numbers, and that's why the big funds and REITs don't like to come in and buy it. They talk about having, Paul's got a great saying, he says he likes to find buildings with hair on it. He spoke about it in his interview, and this was a classic example. They've now come in, they've literally gone through all the financials, and they've said in simple terms, they've institutionalized it. And this portfolio is a classic example of one of our exit strategies, is to bring all these portfolios together, institutionalize the funding, the returns, and ultimately the financials. And then we can actually on-sell it to a fund or a REIT and make quite a significant return. So I think really, standing outside SG Properties, Wealth Migrate 1, it's amazing 2 years later to come back and look at the track record. I think the fact that 70% of all the investors who've invested in this portfolio have reinvested more than 70%, to be fair, is actually credit to Henny and Michiel from Wealth Migrate, and to Paul and Alan and the guys from SG Properties in terms of what has actually been happening. And lastly, I would say one thing, please watch the updates from Paul Salandra on what's happening in the Atlanta market. Absolutely amazing, some of the stuff that's happening. And if these videos are of interest to you, share them with your friends and family. We are here at the moment on a digital buyer's trip where we are sharing as much information as we possibly can. So if you're interested in it, go to wmbuyerstour.wealthmigrate.com, and you can literally follow us online or even on WhatsApp. Scott Picken signing out from Atlanta. We're off to go and look at a whole bunch of new opportunities here in Atlanta. And then we're off to Memphis, Dallas, San Francisco. There's some amazing opportunities coming up. You don't want to miss out. And for those investors who invested in Medical One, I'm sure you're smiling all the way to the bank. Cheers.